Good morning. I'm Steve Franzik, retired professor of political science from the U.S. Naval Academy.
Good morning. I'm Tom Vance. I'm a professor at Kansas State University.
Hello, I'm Tom Tinder, an attorney from Charleston, West Virginia.
And would you introduce yourselves?
My name is Josh Blessing, and I live in Boca Raton, Florida, and I go to Pine Crest School.
My name is Evan Challerton. I live in Coral Springs, Florida, and I also go to Pine Crest School.
I'm Eddie Hoffman. I live in Coral Springs, and I also go to Pine Crest.
Okay.
The question this morning is number one. In 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King said, quote, "Never in the history of this nation have so many people been arrested for the cause of freedom and human dignity," unquote. What lessons can we learn from the Children's March in Birmingham, Alabama? What is civic engagement, and what is its significance in American history? What responsibility, if any, do schools have to promote this engagement? You may begin.
The Children's March in Birmingham, Alabama, which Dr. Martin Luther King is referring to, what has become commonly known as the Birmingham Children's Crusades of 1963. The public demonstration was a part of a long series of nonviolent protests in response to the systematic oppression of African Americans in Alabama during this time period and all over the United States. In the height of segregation and Jim Crow laws, Birmingham especially became a hotspot for these protests because of the lack of response by government officials to racially charged hate crimes, which would later go on to include the heinous 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. By the summer of 1963, after months of watching parents and adult members of their communities fail to get results from the government, the youth of Birmingham decided to take it upon themselves and protest nonviolently, in hopes that a large-scale public demonstration would bring awareness to their cause. They were met with mass arrests, and police were ordered to spray the children with powerful water hoses, hit them with batons, and threaten them with police dogs. After a few days of this continuing and footage of police brutality circulated, city officials decided to desegregate businesses in Birmingham, which was a step in the right direction.
Mass protest was a demonstration that brought national attention to and is viewed by historians of a turning point in the civil rights movement by displaying the dehumanization of African Americans that occurred. We see from this situation the importance of taking action on societal issues. It took a lot of courage for the protesters in Birmingham's Youth March to organize their movement in the first place, to stand their ground nonviolently. While many of them suffered a variety of consequences at the time of the march, such as being beaten, targeted with a fire hose, their courage created a ripple effect for others to do the same and exercise their right to civically engage properly. Civil engagement has become the most quintessential aspects of American history and celebrates the people's right to better their communities. It has been proven to be essential in American history from the civil rights protests against the Vietnam life of citizens, such as paying taxes or joining political groups.
The roots of civic engagement are ingrained within some of our most foundational documents: the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, the Federalist Papers. The First Amendment establishes the rights that citizens have to participate in civic engagement by protecting freedom of speech, assembly, the press, and petitioning government to redress grievances. Additionally, Federalist 10 by James Madison sets the precedent that factions within the population will form because people of similar interests and backgrounds will strive to achieve and preserve their liberty through actions. These actions are supposed to not only affect their own lives, but to better the community overall. This can and should be promoted by schools with out-of-school activities or clubs that gather on and off school campuses. Schools have a responsibility to put their students in these civic engagement groups to collaborate with each other, because it is an opportunity to learn outside of a traditional classroom setting while also benefiting the community. Students should feel as though their school is a place that cherishes the idea of community service and involvement, because for many, the academic community is one of the only places that they are able to come together with resources to effectively and efficiently engage their communities.
Thank you very much. As you might guess, we've got some follow-up questions. Would you talk a little bit more about the question of how the Constitution either promotes or helps to denigrate the ability of civic engagement?
So there are a lot of different ways and forms of civic engagement, but one big one, especially like the question was talking about, is like protests and non-violent like demonstrations in the public, and the Constitution definitely protects it a lot with the First Amendment, with four of its major parts being like protecting freedom of speech, assembly, petitioning the government to redress grievances, and the press. So those four together definitely like incentivize and protect the liberties that go along with like public demonstrations and public gatherings to address societal issues and problems that people may be experiencing, and like any cause that they're wanting to push forward.
I certainly agree with my partner, and to build on top of that, I really would like to stress that the most important thing, in my opinion, that the Constitution truly protects is the right to engage in solidarity with one another. Even something as simple as the right to vote is an act of solidarity with your fellow Americans by essentially being able to have a say, a collective say in how the government should form. The right to protest, the right to petition, the right to freedom of the press is a right for different groups to act in solidarity with one another. This idea of factions that James Madison put out is essentially enshrined in the Constitution, because in articles like the First Amendment, which protects the right to petitioning, the right to speech, as well as the 14th Amendment, which ensures that laws have equal protection for all groups. It ensures that solidarity is kept between all factions, and all different groups through a pluralist style of government are able to have their needs met so that the American way of life can improve for all.
But are some groups left out of those protections? Are there any limits on civic engagement that are provided by the Constitution or by law?
I would say in general, the most simple explanation for what is prohibited is violence. In basically all cases, you can see non-violent protests, rallies, even things like labor unions nowadays are a legal and effective way to bring about change within the country. However, at the same time, violence is never been accepted by the population. You can see in something like the Civil War, for example, you cannot decide to unilaterally secede from the government and then violently, come back at the government for doing so. At the end of the day, I think the simple deciding factor for whether something is considered to be allowed or not in terms of civic engagement is nonviolence versus violence in general.
Let's switch our attention to civil disobedience. Is civil disobedience peaceful, intentional breaking of the law always justified as a form of civic engagement?
Can you give an example?
Yeah, is there ever a time when civil disobedience is not an appropriate form of protest or engagement?
I would say yes. If it creates an imminent danger, it's kind of the same. It's like with free speech. If it poses an imminent threat to public safety, then it would be within the government's rights to either try to make it not so that it puts an imminent threat to society, or to shut it down as a whole, as long as like they're not retaliating violently.
I I agree with my colleague. I also agree that civil disobedience is not really acceptable in a time of like national insecurity, such as 9/11 or war, because the country needs to come together and focus on one aspect of life, while disobedience is participated within the country.
Okay.
You talked about the right to vote. Should we have compulsory or mandatory requirement to vote here in the United States? Why or why not?
I would say no, absolutely not. And that is because the idea of civic engagement, I absolutely think a part of that is choosing to refuse to engage with the system. A part of civic engagement, if a voter, for example, believes that all the options presented in front of them for a particular election are not acceptable, they absolutely should have the right to ensure, through statistics such as voter turnout, voter registration, things that governors and politicians do in fact look at, saying, if you choose not to engage with the system, you're choosing to say that the people that are presented in front of you do not represent you.
Thank you.
Time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Judges, we don't have a lot of time for feedback. I'll just give you that information.
Okay, very quickly, I think you got a good historical background. I really like the fact that you broadened out the undergirding of civic engagement to talk about the Federalist Papers and the Declaration of Independence aside from the Constitution.
I would echo that, those sentiments. You did a great job. I do like, I picked up on that too, the Madison's ideas about factions and those being a normal part of our democratic system, and actually good in many ways. And we don't think about it in quite those ways right in the current moment. So I thought you did a fantastic job. On the civil disobedience question, you might have looked at Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail to consider when it's justified in a democracy. Not always would Dr. King say that it's justified, but overall, great job.
I thought you made a very good presentation, and then your responses to our questions were very well reasoned and well documented. And I thought that this is a competition where you're supposed to be experts coming and testifying before a congressional committee, and I thought that you came across as good experts. Congratulations to you, and you and your teachers are to be highly commended for participating in this program, particularly during these extraordinary times. Good luck to you.
Thank you.